we have the new M1 Macs in hand. Here's our first impressions and how they compare to Intel-based Macs. Stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back to Today in Tech. I'm Juliet, joined as always by Computerworld Executive Editor Ken Mingis, as well as Macworld Senior Writer Michael Simon. So Ken, you've got one of the new MacBook Pros, right, in hand, and you previously had a 16-inch MacBook Pro. What are your first impressions?
Correct. Okay. So yeah, no, for the record, it looks just like the last 13-inch MacBook Pro. It really doesn't look any different. Mike has already been
It's
doubting that
identical.
this is really an M1. I know exactly. But
Yeah, they didn't
actually,
they didn't change
surprisingly,
a single thing about it
no.
visually.
Yeah, externally, it's the same.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, that what I was going to say is, having ordered it the day they were first announced, I didn't really expect to get this. Apple had initially said November 24th to the 27th, and then suddenly, boom, it showed up on
Well, I mean, clearly
Tuesday.
they saw your name on the order, right?
Yeah.
I don't think so. My name in the order doesn't seem to make any difference at all. But nonetheless, I mean, it was apparently in the early, the first round of shipping Macs. In terms of how it works, it really is fast. Okay. I mean, I know we've seen a lot of benchmarks, a lot of geek benchmarks, making it apparent that this blows past the Intel processors in the MacBook Pros now. I haven't run any more tests and have already been out there, but just in day-to-day quick, first hands-on use, it's blazingly fast. And it just goes to show you, when you can match the hardware, which is what Apple's doing with its own silicon, with the software, Mac OS Big Sur. You get it's a yin and a yang that really combines to create an amazingly fluid system. I thought I might have some issues with some corporate apps and some third-party apps in terms of running in emulation with Rosetta 2. I have not. It is true, if you've got something like Outlook or Office, and which have not been compiled yet for the M1 chip, the first time you run them, it does take a good 10 or 15 seconds while Rosetta 2 sort of translates the code. But after that, they launch as quickly as they would on an Intel Mac. The upgrade process, moving my files and everything over from my 16-inch MacBook Pro to this one was actually fairly smooth. I was really surprised. I was prepared for all kinds of hiccups, things that didn't work. That went well. So it's been about as seamless a transition as I can imagine. Now, it's, the big difference, I've gone from a 16-inch screen to a 13-inch screen, which to be honest with you, has also been less of an issue than I thought it would be. But in terms of the hardware itself, Apple really delivered on this one.
What's interesting to me is, based on what we did at Macworld testing and even just anecdotally around the internet, that the 13-inch Air, which is under $1,000, just barely, is basically the same machine as the 13-inch Pro. The only difference that I can tell is on like sustained performance. Like if you're doing like a half-hour video render, you'll be able to keep those peak speeds longer because it has a fan, so the processor doesn't ever have to throttle down. Otherwise, those benchmarks, you're hitting those peak speeds, single core, multi-core, basically the same. I mean, they're your normal everyday immediate tasks, they're the same. And it's so the first question I have is, why would you need the Pro unless you're like a real pro, if you will? Like we're professionals in the sense that we use these things all day long for work. I wouldn't consider myself a Mac using pro, in the sense that I can probably do all my work on a $329 iPad and get it done. Like, I don't need that kind of power.
But how much fun is that really going to
Sure,
be?
of course.
Exactly.
I mean,
you could, yes.
So you're future proofing, for one, by getting the Pro, because you're getting, so it's in the lower end MacBook Air, you get one less GPU core, which you're not going to notice in a day-to-day thing. Maybe you will over the course of 2 years, 3 years from now, when things are changing and different. Otherwise, it's the same. You're getting 8 gigs of RAM. or 16 gigs of RAM.
I got
if you
16 in this one.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I've read some stories about that and the way Apple is handling the RAM. So it's been soldered to the motherboard for years and years and years, with the exception of some iMac models. It's still you still can't replace it, but it's not soldered to the motherboard. It's on the chip.
It's part of the chip, yeah.
Yeah, so
the unified RAM.
So yeah, Apple's calling it unified RAM, or maybe that's the technical term for it. I don't know, but what that means is that system, the way the system accesses it is completely different than it was before, because the system, the chip and the memory are all working together now. And I mean, there are reports on the internet of people trying to max out memory in the way that they would previously. For example, 17 Chrome windows running YouTube, things like that. Things that you wouldn't normally do, but things that tax the current, not just Intel Macs, but PCs running 8 gigs of RAM. Like your system would slow to a crawl. And first of all, it takes more to get there. And second of all, it's so much easier to unlock it or to uncrawl it than it was in the past, because of the way everything's working together. And so when we're buying these things, I wrote an article last week about how I wanted a MacBook Pro with 32 gigs of RAM. Maybe I don't really need that.
I don't think, I think this is, I've seen a lot of pieces along those lines saying that we're going to have to really rethink how we spec machines going forward, because in the past, there were all these components. You could get the different GPU.
In the past, 3 weeks ago.
Well, in the past, as of before last week.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, I can say that I've tried to do something like that by, firing up some YouTube 4K videos and having a variety of apps open. I haven't even heard the fan come on yet. Okay. And I know it's got a fan. That's why I got the Pro, again, so that at some point, as you say, future proofing and for like long sustained read writes, use hitting the CPU, fine. But I agree with you. The MacBook Air, is the difference between these two in terms of day-to-day use. You would not notice it.
Yeah, and I don't really know. So going forward, I think we're going to see much like the iPhone. The differences aren't going to be the differences that we think, whereas, the 16-inch has a better processor and a higher RAM limit and things like that. I think it's going to be more the 16-inch maybe has Face ID, and the 16-inch has a better camera and more features and a nicer design, or maybe a micro LED screen or mini LED, whichever one it is. I get them confused. But I think Apple's going to be differentiating its Pro machines more like it does the iPhone than it does currently with the Mac. And
I think that's a smart take.
It's an interesting transition, if you will. And I wonder how the rest of the industry is kind of going to handle this, because, Apple's not the first PC maker to do an ARM-based laptop. It's the first one to do an ARM-based laptop that's good. And it's the first one to do an ARM-based laptop that's like mind-blowingly good. Because, for one, they've had practice with the iPhone chip for 10 years. But they also, by controlling this whole stack, there was an article earlier this week talking about how this was like Steve Jobs' dream when he was still alive, obviously. So they had the iPhone and they have the whole system. He wanted to bring this to the Mac, and Tim Cook, or maybe it was Craig Federighi, I don't remember who was saying it. They were saying that, this is finally the dream realized for the Mac, and they are 3 years down the line already. We're not seeing it. What we saw right now is very, very slipshod, so to speak. Same design, new chip, same battery.
Yeah, I was going to say slipshod. I wouldn't say slipshod, but I know what you mean.
This is the bridge. For lack of a better word, yeah.
This is the bridge. I mean, you're right. There's no redesign here. There's nothing that screams out this is, anything different from the last.
There's not a design change even internally, really, other than the chip. The battery is the exact same on the Air and the Pro. The touch bar is the same. The chip has 2 Thunderbolt controllers, and it still has 2 ports. Like, it's identical, because they're focusing on, all right, we're just getting this out there. We're showing people what these Macs, what they can do, what they will do. But I mean, what's going to happen to the Macintosh a couple of years from now? And this opens up just such a wide swath of possibilities for a Mac. Steve Jobs, to bring him up again, 10 years ago said, PCs were like trucks and the iPhone was like a sports car. I forget the analogy, something like that. meaning that they were utilitarian, semi-obsolete devices that we have to keep around to perform a singular purpose. And for the most part, that's true. We can do. I can do all my work on an iPad, or I don't want to. I want to use a Mac. But I think what this processor and the whole system that Apple has designed, and as it matures and evolves, and as they craft it into what their vision is, I mean, we're going to see things that merge all these products and do things that we aren't even really thinking about. That next big thing that everyone keeps saying, where is it? It's not here yet, but I think this is the start of it.
Well, we talked about this, a few weeks back, right after Apple announced this, and it is exciting because it is actual innovation, which is something we really haven't seen in this area in a long time. And it as you say, it opens the door. I want to back up for 1 second. You had talked a few minutes ago about the difference between like the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro and how they'll be differentiated in the future. I mean, I could easily see something where, the MacBook Air comes with a traditional 720p camera, but if you've got a MacBook Pro, you've got a 1080p or something super high def, whatever, and I think you make a very good point that these will eventually, or in the not too distant future, be differentiated by features that are not the chip, the amount of memory, the storage. Those will all be sort of a given across the line. And then there'll be something added on top of that. And that I am fascinated to see, where Apple goes.
I mean, it kind of blows up the whole industry, because right now we're, like cheap PCs, Chromebooks, things like that, they're predicated on these tinker toy processors. And when Apple announced this ARM transition, that's what PC people, enthusiasts said, well, get ready. The Mac's going to be $1,000 and it's going to suck. Well, that ain't the case. It's $1,000 and it's faster than $1,500 laptops, gaming laptops. So, Apple just totally, they took that out of the equation. Speed is no longer an issue on the Mac. No matter what you spend, you're getting a machine that is faster than you need.
Well, it's not just
it's like the iPhone.
It's not just the speed. It's also, I mean, in terms of battery life. I mean, I pull this thing off charge in the morning, wander around the house with it, wander outside, wherever I'm working, if I'm running video, editing, whatever. And the battery, it just goes and it's like, it goes. I haven't even run it out because by the time I'm done with it at the end of the day, it's still got juice, and
also an iPhone thing, they're the leaders in the industry. They don't pack it with a 4,500 milliamp hour battery like Samsung does, but they get you through 20 hours on the Macs and 17 hours on the other ones. And that's what they're doing here too. They're making sure that all the things that you worried about, all the things that you predicated your buying decision on previously, out the window.
Yeah.
No matter what you buy, you're getting a battery that lasts your entire workday and the entire day, and probably more. You're getting more speed than you'll ever need. And you're getting a machine that you don't have to fret over. Do I need 16 gigs of RAM? Do I need 512 gigs of storage? This is it. It's whether you want to spend $9.99 or $15.99. That I think the people that are going to buy the higher ones, like you and I, know what they're looking for, and they're there for that reason. But that Air they're going to sell a ton of those.
Oh, and well, they should. I really did debate between the 8 gigs and the 16 gigs of RAM because I don't really do anything that really requires a lot of RAM.
I would have,
but I thought
16.
I did, and I did
out of the box too, because we didn't really know. I probably still would, like you did. I mean, it's $200 and you can't do anything about it once you buy it.
Right.
So just for that reason, I think it's smart to get the 16.
But those are the exact kinds of equations that you run through your head when buying new hardware that we're going to have to revisit now. Because that may not necessarily be the case. You really might not need 16 unless you're doing something super, super intensive.
Yeah, and I mean, 32 for extra $400 or $200 over 16, whatever they charge. I don't think it's necessary. Yeah. And I'm curious to see what's the Mac Pro going to look like. That thing goes up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM.
Well, if Apple comes out and tells you can get by with 16 gigs, and we'll know something's up.
But like everyone who buys these things is going to have to change their whole mentality, their whole philosophy of what it means to buy a PC. It's not just a Mac; it's the whole PC buying landscape is different.
I've got one quick question before we wrap up here. And I'm wondering, Ken, were you running Big Sur on your 16-inch MacBook Pro? And what is the Mac OS experience like on the new M1 MacBook Pro? Is it different? Are there any like glaring differences, or is it kind of just more of the same?
No, it's more the same. I mean, the difference would be the hardware. It's a little faster. The short answer is yes. I was running Big Sur on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. I didn't really have any issues with that. I mean, no reason I should. It's last year's model, so it's fairly current. The only difference is there is a certain smoothness. I think the word I used earlier was fluidity to launching apps, moving windows around. It feels even more cohesive than it did before. But I've been pleasantly surprised at, to use the old Apple phrase, it just works. Everything's just working. Everything. I mean, I was able to move from one to another, from the old generation Intel chip to the new M1 chip, and different versions of the apps. The M1, built the ones that were built for M1, the ones that are running in Rosetta emulation. Everything's working fine. It's a very pleasant surprise, and I'm very happy.
Yeah, and the transition is what, 8 days in, and things are already progressing way better than they were in Intel. And
There was one. I did see one fly in the ointment. I guess some people who had bought the new MacBooks, the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, they like to go in and basically wipe the drive and install a completely clean version of the operating system. And there were some boot up issues when they did that. I'm not quite sure if that's been rectified or not. I didn't. I just had a time machine backup from my old laptop.
But you're getting a clean install. Why would you do it?
Yeah, I saw there was some discussion. I think it was on Mac Rumors. Well, people like to do their own thing. But there were a few issues there. I mean, handful, and I think it's something that maybe Apple didn't account for. You don't assume getting a completely new laptop, you're going to wipe it and do it, from an internet restore. But anyway, they tried that. So don't do that. I didn't. And so far, so good.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I think there's going to be, certainly a lot more to learn and uncover as new M1 Macs are released. Do you guys have any idea when they're going to release, like, for example, an M1 iMac? Is there a target date for that, or is that just a general eventually?
My guess is the spring, March-ish. Is
before WWDC, you think?
Probably. June? I think WWDC is when we'll see the Pro machines, the 14-inch, that fabled 14-inch Pro, maybe a 16-inch,
the 16, yeah.
Maybe the higher end desktop, but
mid-year then. By mid-year, Juliet.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
They said it would be about a year-ish. Did they say years for the transition? So what do they have left? They have not much. I mean, they just did three. They only have like 7 machines. They just did 3 of them. So yeah, my guess is if not March, then as Ken says, WWDC. But I don't think they'll do everything in WWDC. I think they'll talk about the architecture of whatever the higher end stuff is. So March is a nice general time for their events. Like they have a March one, a June one, September, and maybe November. This year was different, obviously. So they usually have 4: iPad, iPhone, Mac, and then iOS and stuff. So my guess is
my predictions, they have everything updated by the end of next year and say that they got there ahead of schedule.
Well, that's sure. I think they do like to under promise and over deliver. And I think you're right about that. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for watching this episode of Today in Tech. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon in the corner so you're notified every single time we post a new video. Ken, Mike, and I are going to have a week off for Thanksgiving next week, so there won't be a new video, the 3 of us, next week, but the following week, probably. If you have any comments about the new M1 Macs, if you got one and you have any first impressions that you want to share with us, please leave a comment below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.